The former mayor of London was challenged on his facts and unable to provide any examples of US sanctions, leading many on Twitter to describe the back and forth as a car crash interview. Mr. Livingstone said, "What I have watched is America impose sanctions. Those sanctions mean that the oil corporation that Chavez imposed when he nationalized it is losing £11 billion a year. Now that has an appalling impact on their economy. Mr. Neal interjected. When were all the oil sanctions imposed? The former London mayor said, "I can't remember when it started." The BBC host replied, "Well, I will tell you, they were imposed this week." BBC News, Andrew Neil grilled Ken Livingstone. On BBC This Week, Image BBC, "I am told there have been no oil sanctions on Venezuela. Indeed, the US until this week was Venezuela's biggest importer of oil. The 600,000 barrels of oil a day were exported from Venezuela to America. There have been no oil sanctions. Tell me what the sanctions were," Mr. Livingstone said. "In the first place, there was the collapse of the oil price. That was damaging." Mr. Neal replied, "That is not a sanction." "What were the sanctions?" The former Labour MP for Brent East said, "Oh, I don't know, I am a retired pensioner." The BBC host was not letting him off the hook. He said, "Oh no, this is quite important because as we speak tonight children in Venezuela are starving to death. I am asking you, which sanctions?" The first sanctions were introduced in 2015 by President Obama, and they were aimed then solely at regime members suspected of corruption and human rights abuses. That was all. That cannot bring down an economy nor create hyperinflation. So I ask you again, what US sanctions have caused this collapse in the economy? Mr. Livingstone said, "American sanctions are illegal under international law." Mr. Neal responded, "You are not answering the question. The question is what sanctions could have caused this." BBC News, Ken Livingstone claims his information was coming from an ambassador. Image BBC, there was not a single trading sanction on Venezuela. You could export or import anything other than arms. At the same time, Venezuela got £80 billion in loans from China and Russia. So why did the economy collapse? The former London mayor said, "Because you have got in the first place a collapse of oil prices, then you had the American sanctions. And you may have information that says there haven't been sanctions, but when the Venezuelan ambassador here in London talks to me about those sanctions, I believe what he is saying." Mr. Neal said, "You have not been able to establish any American oil sanctions until this week. That cannot cause the collapse of the economy." On Twitter, Wayne Richard Butler said, "Car crash interview again. Well done. Mr. Livingstone looks foolish. Of course you'll be accused of supporting the government by left-wing supporters." Robert Murray said, "This is painful. Ken on the ropes for another rant." A United Nations human rights expert denounced the US oil sanctions imposed on Monday, saying they would compound a grave humanitarian crisis. Idris Jazari, a UN special reporter studying the negative impact of sanctions, said, "Coercion, whether military or economic, must never be used to seek a change in government in a sovereign state. The use of sanctions by outside powers to overthrow an elected government is in violation of all norms of international law," he said in a statement in Geneva. In the tussle over oil, Guaido worked this week with Washington to wrest control of PDVSA's U.S. subsidiary Citgo from its board. Citgo and Maduro's government responded by ordering dozens of Citgo's expatriate staff in the United States to return to Caracas by the end of February. People familiar with the matter said,